Okay, strap yourselves in for this one because we are diving into some really seriously deep waters.
Key waters, you could even say.
We're talking about the fallout, the controversy
A whole mess.
from UFC fighter Bryce Mitchell's comments about Hitler.
Yeah. It's not your typical athlete gaffe or misspeak.
Right.
Mitchell's statements on his podcast, Arc Insanity, went way beyond
Yeah.
a simple slip-up.
Yeah.
This is some
into dangerous territory.
dangerous territory. Exactly. Touching on the Holocaust,
Yeah.
anti-Semitism, the whole 9 yards,
We've
really forces us to look at the limits of free speech.
We've got a whole lot of sources
Yeah.
to dig through here. We've got articles from AP News, Sky News,
First Post,
yeah, and even some direct quotes from Dana White himself.
the man in charge,
So
the president of UFC.
what we're trying to do today
Yeah.
is figure out how these statements have
Right.
affected the MMA world and beyond.
How they've reverberated through the MMA community.
Yeah, and this whole balance between free speech and responsibility,
Exactly.
and how we even handle this in the digital landscape, you know?
It's a whole new
An
thing.
athlete's, an athlete's personal views can reach the entire globe instantly.
In the blink of an eye.
So to give everyone the backstory, this all
So
happened
stage.
back in January 2025.
Yeah, beginning of the year.
Bryce Mitchell, ranked 13th in the UFC featherweight division,
Pretty high up there.
decided to use his podcast to share some,
To share his unique interpretations of history, let's just say.
unconventional.
Unconventional is a good word for it.
He didn't just admire Hitler. He went so far as
Oh, no.
to say that the Holocaust didn't happen.
To deny the Holocaust outright.
Yeah, and that Hitler was a good guy.
Before he got on meth, he said.
Yeah, it's just,
Pretty out there.
and as if that weren't enough, he also made
Oh, there's more.
some
Yeah, he couldn't help himself.
anti-Semitic and homophobic remarks,
Really.
which
Just added fuel to the fire.
created even more
Yeah, a total.
PR nightmare.
And I think it's important here to say that,
Yeah,
to deny the Holocaust,
absolutely.
which resulted in the deaths of 6 million Jews,
A horrific tragedy.
is,
It's not just offensive, it's dangerous.
yeah, it's deeply offensive to the Jewish community, but also contributes to this dangerous
Revisionist history.
revisionist history. Yeah.
That's been bubbling up.
So the reaction to all this was pretty severe.
Swift and severe.
Dana White,
Yeah.
the UFC president,
The big boss.
publicly called Mitchell's words,
In no uncertain terms.
beyond disgusting.
Strong words.
Yeah, and talked about the need for Mitchell to learn about
To get educated.
Hitler and World War II.
Right. Seems like a pretty basic thing.
So you would think,
Right.
after a statement like that from the head of the UFC,
Yeah, you'd expect some repercussions.
there would be some disciplinary action.
Right. At least a slap on the wrist.
But that's where it takes a turn.
Interesting.
Unexpected turn.
Even though there was a huge outcry,
Massive backlash.
Dana White said the UFC would not be punishing Mitchell
And no punishment whatsoever.
because of freedom of speech.
Freedom of speech.
He doubled down on that principle.
And that decision right there
Yeah.
immediately ignited a debate.
Sparked a huge controversy.
Is it really freedom of speech?
Yeah. Where's the line?
When you have someone with a platform like Mitchell
Exactly. He's got a huge audience.
spreading information that could be
Potentially harmful information.
harmful or
Especially
historically inaccurate.
when you're talking about something as sensitive as the Holocaust.
Does the UFC have a responsibility to
Hold their athletes accountable.
to hold their athletes accountable for their words
Especially when those words could lead to
when they could incite
incite hatred.
hatred and discrimination?
Bigotry, the whole thing.
So this situation
Yeah.
puts Dana White in a really tough spot, a real pickle,
On one hand, he's saying that these statements are terrible,
condemning them
but on the other hand, he doesn't want to be seen as
as a
censoring Mitchell's
limiting his freedom of speech.
freedom of speech, right?
Yeah, it's a tightrope walk.
And could this hands-off approach
I mean,
set a precedent
that's the question, isn't it?
for how the UFC handles these kinds of
For future incidents.
situations in the future?
Exactly.
And this isn't just a question for the UFC, is it?
No, this goes way beyond.
This is a bigger issue about how we as a society
As a whole,
navigate these gray
the
areas
whole free speech issue,
of free speech,
especially in the age of social media,
especially in the age of social media where
where everyone's got a platform,
Mitchell's podcast
like so many others.
is giving him a direct line to all his followers,
Millions of them,
allowing him to share his opinions,
unfiltered, uncensored.
no matter how factually accurate or morally sound they are.
whether they're right or wrong.
Oh,
It's a brave new world.
this isn't the first time that an athlete has
Athletes say dumb things all the time.
gotten in trouble
Yeah, it comes with the territory.
for expressing controversial views.
It's almost a rite of passage.
But Mitchell's case feels different.
It does, doesn't it? There's something about this one that just feels different.
Like it's hit a nerve.
It's touched a raw nerve.
Maybe it's the nature of the statements.
I mean, denying the Holocaust.
Or the fact that he used his podcast to do it.
That's a big one.
Or maybe it's that the UFC decided to
not take any action.
not punish him.
Yeah, that's certainly unusual.
Whatever it is, this incident has made us think about
It's forced us to re-examine
the responsibility.
the responsibilities that come with having a platform.
Yeah, that come with having a platform.
And the consequences.
And the potential consequences of
When you just say whatever you want.
unchecked speech.
Yeah, the Pandora's box.
And this conversation
It's not staying confined to the MMA world.
This conversation is happening everywhere.
It's everywhere you look.
Yeah, it's not just in the MMA world.
It's spilled out into the wider world.
We're seeing articles in major publications,
Think pieces galore.
heated debates online,
Social media is blowing up.
even discussions among lawmakers
Yeah, even the government's getting involved.
about the role of online platforms in moderating content
How do you control this stuff?
and preventing the spread of this kind of
It's the million-dollar question.
hate speech.
Hate speech, misinformation, the whole 9 yards.
It seems like Mitchell,
Yeah.
whether he meant to or not,
Whether he intended to or not.
has opened,
He's opened a can of worms.
a Pandora's box of ethical and societal questions
And we're all left grappling with the fallout.
that we're still trying to figure out.
Yeah, it's going to be a long conversation.
Yeah.
And we're just getting started.
This is just the beginning.
Buckle up. It's going to be a bumpy ride.
We're talking about this fundamental tension, right?
Yeah, this real push and pull.
On one side, we have freedom of speech,
A cornerstone of any democracy.
which is super important.
Absolutely.
But then on the other side,
You got the potential for abuse.
we have the potential for that freedom to be used to spread hate and lies.
For people to weaponize
It's
it.
to really hurt people.
Individuals and entire communities.
It's a tough one.
Yeah, a real head scratcher.
Some people think the UFC should have come down harder on Mitchell,
Much harder.
like suspending him,
Maybe even kicking him out.
terminating his contract.
They're saying his comments were so bad.
So over the line
So beyond the pale.
that they had to respond strongly.
Make an example of him.
The argument is that by not punishing him,
Yeah.
they're basically saying it's okay.
You're condoning it.
Yeah, and sending the message that it's okay for athletes to say these hateful things.
And get away with it.
And they're worried that this will,
Encourage others.
embolden other people to do the same thing.
To follow in his footsteps.
And then it just becomes,
A vicious cycle.
like bigotry and intolerance just become the norm.
Normalizing hate speech.
And we have to think about the historical context, too.
Absolutely.
Denying the Holocaust isn't just like stating an opinion.
It's not like saying you prefer Coke over Pepsi.
Right.
It's serious stuff.
It's a form of historical revisionism.
Trying to rewrite history.
Yeah, that's been used to justify anti-Semitism and violence against Jews
For decades.
for a really long time.
So yeah, the argument for punishing Mitchell,
It gets stronger.
it becomes even more compelling when you look at it through that lens.
But then there's
Wait.
the other side of the coin, too.
Right, the slippery slope argument.
If we punish Mitchell,
Where do we draw the line?
could that set a dangerous precedent?
When does free speech become something you can punish?
Yeah, how do we protect free speech and at the same time prevent harm?
That's the million-dollar question.
It's a real dilemma.
A real conundrum.
The people who don't think Mitchell should be punished say that even though his comments are awful.
Reprehensible.
Yeah, censoring him would be worse.
It would open up a whole can of worms.
They're afraid that any controversial opinion
Anything that rubs someone the wrong way,
could be silenced.
and that's a scary thought.
Yeah, that it would chip away at our free speech rights.
Erode them bit by bit.
And that people would be afraid to speak their minds.
A chilling effect on open dialogue.
It's a tough situation.
No doubt about it.
But for me, it all comes back to the power of Mitchell's platform.
He's got a huge reach.
He's got a lot of followers.
Millions of them.
And they listen to what he says.
He's an influencer.
Especially younger fans who are more impressionable.
They look up to him
So does the UFC.
as this huge organization.
With all its power and reach,
Yeah.
have a responsibility to make sure its athletes are...
Using their platforms responsibly.
Yeah.
It's a good question.
And it raises another question
Hit me with it.
about what responsibility organizations have
Yeah.
to regulate what their members say.
Even if it's not on official channels.
Do they have to step in when their members say things that are harmful?
Or discriminatory.
Even if they say those things on their own time?
In their personal lives.
Yeah.
It's a tricky one.
How do we balance free speech
Yeah.
with protecting people from hate speech?
Especially vulnerable groups.
It's a delicate balancing act
And we're all still trying to figure it out.
as a society.
Yeah, we're all in this together.
One thing that I find really interesting
Yeah.
is how Mitchell's comments just blew up online
Like wildfire.
within hours of his
Uh,
podcast going live.
People were talking about it everywhere.
It was everywhere.
All over social media.
News websites, online forums.
It was the talk of the town.
It really shows the power of the internet.
The double-edged sword.
Yeah, it can be amazing.
For amplifying voices, for good or for bad.
And for starting conversations.
Facilitating dialogue.
But it can also be a breeding ground
A petri dish.
for misinformation.
And hate.
And Mitchell's case shows how quickly these bad ideas can spread
Go viral.
and reach way more people than they were intended for.
Way beyond the target audience.
It makes you think about the responsibility of these platforms.
Like YouTube and Spotify.
Yeah, where Mitchell's podcast is hosted.
Do they have to keep an eye on what people are sharing?
Did he have an obligation to monitor the content?
And to take action against users who are spreading hate?
Or misinformation?
That's the whole debate about content moderation.
Yeah.
And it's a tough one.
It's hard to police online speech.
It's like playing whack-a-mole.
Right, they're trying to balance free expression.
With keeping their platforms from being used to incite violence.
Or spread harmful stuff.
It's a complex problem.
With no easy answers.
A real Gordian knot.
And it's something we're going to be debating for a long time.
For years to come.
It feels like Mitchell just dumped a whole bunch of gasoline
On an already raging fire.
We were already struggling with these questions about free speech.
And online platforms.
And the responsibility we all have in this digital age.
Of individuals and organizations.
But this incident has made it even more urgent.
It's brought it to the forefront.
It's forcing us to confront them head on.
No more kicking the can down the road.
One thing that I find really unsettling about all of this is that it shows just how fragile our society is.
How delicate the balance is.
It reveals how easily hate and misinformation can take root.
Infiltrate the mainstream.
And erode trust and undermine our values.
Yeah, it's a sobering thought.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground here, a lot to think about. What do you think is the biggest takeaway from all this?
You know, I think it's the fact that words really do matter. Mitchell's case shows how someone with a platform, someone people listen to, can use their words to cause real damage.
Yeah, it's easy to forget that sometimes.
We've seen it throughout history. Hateful speech can lead to violence and discrimination.
Right, even genocide.
Exactly. And in today's world, with social media and the internet, that power is even greater.
That's a scary thought. We always talk about free speech, but we don't always think about the other side of it.
Right, the potential consequences when it's abused.
Yeah.
And it goes beyond just Mitchell's words themselves.
Yeah.
This whole incident raises the question of whether this kind of hate speech is becoming more acceptable.
Oh, you mean because someone like Mitchell, a UFC fighter, is saying these things?
Exactly. It can make others feel like it's okay to express similar views.
Like it's normal.
Right. And that's a dangerous path. It can lead to the breakdown of social norms and more intolerance.
It's a chilling thought. So what can we do about it?
Well, we have to challenge these kinds of statements whenever we hear them. Silence can be seen as agreement.
I think you're right.
We all have a responsibility to push back against hate and misinformation.
How do we do that?
Well, we can speak up when we hear something offensive. We can educate ourselves and others about the dangers of prejudice. And we can support organizations that fight discrimination. Every little bit helps.
It sounds like you're saying we all have a role to play.
Absolutely. We can all contribute to creating a more inclusive and just society.
This whole deep dive has really opened my eyes. It's made me realize that there are a lot of challenges we face in this digital age.
And this incident with Mitchell highlights some of the big ones.
Like what?
Like the limits of free speech, the role of online platforms, and how to deal with hate and intolerance.
So, what now? Where do we go from here? How do we balance free speech with protecting people from harmful ideas?
That's the question, isn't it?
Okay.
There's no easy answer. But I think we have to start with education.
What do you mean?
We need to teach people how to think critically, how to spot fake news and bias, how to have respectful conversations even when we disagree.
Those are important skills.
And we have to be aware of the power of our own words and use them responsibly.
I like that.
We also need to hold each other accountable for the things we say and share online.
I think that's a good place to leave it. This deep dive into Bryce Mitchell's comments has been unsettling, but it's been a good reminder of how complex our world is.
It's definitely given us a lot to think about.
And as we move forward, we need to remember to be careful with our words, to stand up against hate, and to keep searching for truth and understanding.
Well said. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.